So what's the latest on the audits? What's relevant? What's irrelevant? What's the meaning? What's not the meaning? Set the people straight, and everyone can call you biased and whatever after your assessment. But inform the people.
So currently, there's audits in Arizona. There's an audit in Fulton, part of Fulton County. There's calls for audits in all of Georgia, all of Wisconsin, and all of Pennsylvania. There's an audit likely moving forward in Pennsylvania by the state Senate.
What's the scope of the audit? What does the audit include? What does it exclude?
Really, everything that goes to the counting and canvassing of ballots that should have occurred the first time, in my view. So it's looking at who did only constitutionally qualified people vote. Did they only vote by a constitutionally qualified method? And doing the count and canvass in a constitutionally qualified manner according to the original state legislative rules. So it's double checking the machines, double checking the paper ballots, double checking the voter registration rolls, double checking all of the procedures whereby people were considered legal voters, cast a ballot, and how that ballot was counted and canvassed. And so according to state legislative rules rather than outside of state legislative rules. And so, like, for example, in the Maricopa County, a preliminary report from the audit is that there were a lot of ballots that were cast that have questions concerning them, either because of who cast the ballots or because of something about the ballots themselves. And so now where there has been, I'm all in favor of audits because they increase transparency, public confidence in the electoral process. They identify flaws in the process. They expose those flaws for remedial action, legislative or executive. They keep the public informed throughout the entire process. And they can lead to legislative reforms and can lead to political change down the road. Where there's been some confusion is there's some people out there who think that the effect of the audit can be a decertification of presidential electors and that can lead to the change in the presidency. There's people who think that it can change who's in the Senate or in the House, and they're mistaken.
Okay, so and before we get there, because I know what Nick Rekieta said about it, but first things first. Apparently from the audit, your Apple ID phone. I just got a pop-up from Apple on my screen. I don't know if anybody saw that. Apparently the audit has revealed some anomalies, but the extent and the meaning of these anomalies have yet to be assessed, I guess. Duplicated ballots, the totals not matching the certified totals. Explain what that means to ignoramuses like myself and whether or not it's relevant at this stage or what it could mean at a later stage.
So what they've preliminarily identified, and again, it's not final, not conclusive, not verified at this stage, the preliminary identification is that there are people who cast ballots who were not registered at the time they cast ballots. That there are people whose ballots were cast, but then later were recognized that they shouldn't have been able to cast ballots. And then there are a bunch of ballots that themselves don't appear to have been lawfully cast ballots based on the nature of the ballot.
Do we know numbers on this?
As well as some other issues about whether the machines caught things in a timely manner. Tucker Carlson went into detail about that in Georgia. Now, the hand recount likely resolved that problem. There's some questions about that. But the point of this, and that's where I've been emphasizing to people, the point of this is not changing the presidential election outcome. The point of this is to figure out what happened and how we can make sure it doesn't happen again if there were problems, and how to correct them and remedy them and increase public confidence in the elections. The context of, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, do we know the number? Because I saw this is going back to...
It varies. Different ballots in different categories. The one that a lot of people are talking about, 74,000 ballots in question, is to one category. Then there's 16,000 in another category, so on and so forth. If people are wondering, are there more ballots in question than the margin of victory in Arizona, the answer is yes.
Okay, and now this brings us to the second question. First of all, Jim Scudo, someone is saying, the big lies that people are believing now, that the audit has shown anything relevant. I thought, that is an oversimplification to the point of being fake news, and that's what they do. It's not going to change anything, and this is something you have mentioned. We've discussed it, but this is your knowledge, not mine. From day one, from before we were not even allowed to discuss this on YouTube, you said there is no changing the outcome with respect to the presidential election. Now, is that the same as relates to senators? Because I understand there's a legal distinction.
Yeah, there is. But it's rarely consequential. So for people to understand, basically you have a limited time frame whereby you can set aside the results of the presidential election. The same is true, though it's a different timetable with some different rules depending on the state, for the Senate and the House. But in both contexts, once it's done, it's done. And the only remedy after that is impeachment. There is no decertification of electors. There's no callbacks of electors, recall of electors. That ship has sailed. And to give people an example, this often comes up in the political context. So, for example, various of our constitutional amendments were certified by the archivist, whoever the Congress gave. At different times, Congress gave different people the authority, but ultimately it went to the archivist, who's the head of the Library of Congress. And if that archivist said this amendment has met the constitutional standard to now be part of the Constitution, it was immediately declared thereafter. That was a legally binding decision that cannot be contested or challenged. People try to challenge this in the context of a bunch of different amendments, but particularly the 16th Amendment, where they documented that there was good evidence to believe that the archivist had made a mistake, that it had not met the constitutional requirements for passage. The courts made clear, we're not getting near that with a 100-foot pole, because then we have issues with the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, and we need it to be final at some point. And we're just going to say, once the archivist makes a declaration, it's final. It was my argument with a Hollywood director as to one of the big loopholes in the Constitution is that technically the archivist could probably declare himself king and disband Congress because he has the final power to declare what's in the Constitution by saying what amendments have passed. So theoretically, I remember that this Hollywood director believed some crazy stuff. He was like, oh, no, that's way too crazy. That can't be true. I was like, that's one of the things that is true, not all the crazy stuff you believe. But he was sitting there on his bed while he's doing it. So it was crazy. It was a crazy scene. But well, you had like people coming in. So because of that, they don't. That's one example. Another example is Congress or state legislatures will pass a bill, and later there'll be arguments that there was fraud in the passage of the bill, that there was misleading, that the House didn't count the vote right. And the courts have been clear, we're not touching that. If the Speaker of the House, whoever the designated official is, says that bill is passed, end of story. We don't look past it. We don't look beyond it. And so the same is true for federal elections for the most part. There's certain very limited circumstances in which House members or senators, there can be an issue, but that is generally determined by the House and Senate itself. Same issue. And generally expulsion standards are required. And generally those expulsion standards are usually 2/3 of the relevant House or Senate. And I also don't encourage people who think it's a good idea to open up that can of worms to just start recalling people on grounds that they didn't really get elected. You think about who has the power and how likely that's going to be used for you or against you down the road. So I don't encourage that line of thought anyway, but there is no legal authority. Anybody telling you recall, whatever, that's purely a symbolic vote that they're talking about. There's no constitutional authority for that to have any constitutional consequence.